What's happening, folks? Back with another reaction, back with some more Thomas Dolby, and we're continuing through his 1992 album Astronauts Heretics. Thank you again to Stan. And I did want to mention, Stan sent me a lot of material a while back, and I've been slowly going through some of it, but I did want to add another deep dive from a couple albums he sent, which is to say Cabaret Voltaire, a name I really enjoy, but as far as I know, I have no experience. I've never heard any of their music before, so in the not too distant future, I will begin going through a couple albums that Stan sent. In any case, for the time being, we're continuing with Astronauts Heretics, and the next song is That's Why People Fall in Love. I'm amused it seems to state or imply very definitively, can you imply something definitively? That there is a particular reason why people fall in love. Now, certainly there's a handful of reasons: infatuation, physical attraction, personal compatibility that might lead to love. But of course, love is itself random, unpredictable. It comes from happenstance. It comes from situations that you don't expect. I suppose you can put yourself into certain situations where it is more likely, like trying to date, using dating apps, or getting set up by friends, or going to places where people inclined to certain interest or personality types might be common, and thus increasing your odds. But as much as any other human emotion, I would say love and the act of falling into it is not quantifiable. It is not scientifically predictable. So yes, I wonder what Dolby has to say about it. Let's give it a listen. This is Thomas Dolby from his Astronauts Heretics album, and the song is That's Why People Fall in Love.
Stars explode and fireworks done. The sea runs dry and the moon leaves its orbit. And we're on this one thinking it won't. True to form, our vision of order was cloud free up until a sudden Mr. Murphy done us the dirty. Served us up a bitter pill. Prove laws aren't enough, and then the voice of reason flies off the deep end. That's why people fall in love. hoping it won't. I've been around this flat old earth and I still ain't got it such. But I guess so much the universe runs circles around us. That's why people fall in love. That's
It was a very slow fade. Also, who, and maybe there's more than one, but who is that female vocalist just belting into the night? Incredible voice. So, number one, I enjoy when my title speculation intros end up being relevant to the song lyrics, even when it's inversely, like when it's, you know, the opposite of what I'm thinking, or like from an angle that I'm not considering. But I feel like here Dolby is, number one, he's writing lyrics that I think are very profound and yet also comedic. He's using examples from as far back as Archimedes up to Albert Einstein and Yuri Gagarin, so, you know, spanning multiple millennia, but relating to different scientific fields of inquiry, and he is in fact using that as a staging point or post to then discuss love. And I think he is contrasting the rational with the irrational, but also systems of longevity and regularity, but also referring to when those systems no longer function as they have for the majority of their lifespan. Like speaking to stars exploding, which supernova or novae, they happen all the time in cosmic terms, and I guess that's kind of the point, because even relatively brief stars in terms of stellar evolution, they tend to last for at least some millions of years, which for biological creatures and humans specifically is almost unfathomably hard to conceive of, but they end up blowing up. So this bastion of illumination and endurance eventually reaches a point where it explodes. Rivers eventually dry up. The moon might eventually leave its orbit despite being in orbit for literally billions of years. And he seems to be saying that that is ultimately as predictable as people falling in love. So the act of falling in love, it's irrational, it's a product of things which can't really be quantified or predicted, but it is on a meta level as predictable as anything else, because, you know, humans are emotional creatures, and so as with stars exploding, or as with rivers eventually drying up, or moons breaking out of their orbit over long periods of time, humans, however rational they try to be, however, you know, predictable and scientific and organized they are, eventually they're going to meet someone, or they're going to be in a situation where they feel this infatuation, where they're physically attracted to someone, where they're acting in a way that, you know, if they were perfectly rational and scientific, they might choose to avoid, but they can't, because that's what humans are. That's why people fall in love. Maybe I'm misreading it, but it seems to be what he's saying. And I enjoyed, again, the references to, you know, Yuri Gagarin talking to Joe Stalin, and what was it, Einstein, he had relativity locked down or whatever. You know, he could think about things in a theoretical manner beyond what most people could, but when it comes to being disposed to the irrational emotions of what it is to be human, you know, even he couldn't help but avoid that, or couldn't help avoid it. So, yes, ultimately, as I said, it seems to be making the point that humans, even in their most rational and despite the objects of study in all these scientific fields existing in one way for long periods of time, even they eventually give way, even they break down in their rules and their regularities. And so, you know, humans, what chance do we have? And ultimately, we do fall in love because that's just part, again, on a higher, like, meta level, what you would expect. It is actually predictable because it's so unpredictable, and that's what characterizes us humans. So, yeah, maybe I'm misreading that, but that's what I caught on a first listen. A very funky tune, a bit of soul. Obviously, those female vocals, very soulful. There's like some slap bass, or at the very least, like deep and funky bass that's playing. There's some nice keyboard runs as well. There's like this affected, like twisted kind of like synth hit. I don't know how to describe it, but that definitely had a notable sound to it and kept catching my ear. So yeah, it's like funky, wacky sort of synth pop, which seems to be the order of his stylings. Like, it's very much what he does, you know, going back to Blinded by Science. But, you know, that's a tune I knew going back, and I always had this sense that it's kind of like this weird, funky synth pop tune. It very much seems like that's often the mode that he works in. Now, to be fair, this album has been different from his 80s stuff, and I've heard some different stylings and flavors so far already, but nevertheless, this does seem to fit into what appears to be his wheelhouse, which is, again, synth pop with a big, like, funky, soulful flavor. So, yes, as Luca looks at me very ridiculously from across the room, thank you again to Stan. As I said, in the coming weeks, I'm going to start the Cabaret Voltaire journey. I, again, don't really know what to expect, but I will enjoy exploring in that regard. Once again, shout out to not only Stan, but to Mark and a couple others who've been commenting on the Dolby journey thus far. Let me know what you think of this one. I will see you next time. Peace.